In the sweltering heat of August 1901, Hartford, Connecticut bore witness to an event that would forever stain its historical record with shadows of the inexplicable. The city, then a thriving industrial hub along the Connecticut River, hummed with the progress of the new century. Electric streetlights flickered to life each evening, and the clatter of horse-drawn carriages mingled with the occasional automobile's mechanical growl. Yet beneath this veneer of modernity, something ancient and malevolent was about to unfold in the quiet residential district of Asylum Hill, where elm trees cast long shadows across cobblestone streets, and Victorian mansions stood like silent sentinels against the gathering dusk. The Whitmore family had occupied their stately three-story home on Woodland Street for nearly 2 decades, establishing themselves as pillars of Hartford's growing middle class. Edmund Whitmore, a successful insurance executive, had built his fortune on the careful assessment of risk, a profession that would prove bitterly ironic in the weeks to come. His wife, Margaret, devoted herself to charitable works and the raising of their 3 children, 17-year-old Catherine, 14-year-old Thomas, and 8-year-old little Mary, whose laughter had once filled the house's countless rooms with joy. The family maintained a household staff of 4, including Mrs. Abernathy, the stern housekeeper who had served them faithfully since Catherine's birth, and whose detailed personal journals would later provide investigators with their most chilling accounts of the events that followed. On August 12, 1901, a peculiar package arrived at the Whitmore residence, delivered by a nervous postal worker who later claimed the parcel felt unusually cold despite the oppressive summer heat. The package bore no return address, only Edmund's name written in an elegant yet somehow unsettling script that seemed to flow like dark water across the brown paper wrapping. Inside, nestled within layers of black velvet, lay an ornate music box crafted from what appeared to be ebony wood, its surface inlaid with mother-of-pearl figures that depicted children dancing in a circle around a central maypole. The craftsmanship was exquisite, clearly European in origin, yet there was something subtly wrong about the proportions of the dancing figures. Their limbs seemed too long, their faces too angular, as if the artisan had been working from memories of childhood rather than direct observation. Mrs. Abernathy would later write in her journal that the moment the music box was brought into the house, the temperature in the parlor seemed to drop several degrees, and the family's usually spirited terrier, Buster, began to whimper and retreat to the farthest corner of the room. Edmund examined the mysterious gift with the practical eye of a businessman, searching for clues to its origin or purpose, but found nothing to indicate who might have sent such an expensive item to his family. Margaret, ever gracious, suggested it might be a belated wedding anniversary gift from one of Edmund's European business associates, though she privately confided to Mrs. Abernathy that something about the music box made her feel deeply uneasy, as if unseen eyes were watching her from within its intricate carvings. The key to wind the mechanism was attached to the box by a thin silver chain, and when Edmund first turned it, the melody that emerged was hauntingly beautiful, a lullaby that none of the family could identify, yet which seemed strangely familiar, as if it had been heard in dreams or half remembered from earliest childhood. The dancing figures began their eternal waltz, rotating slowly around the maypole while the melody played, their carved faces seeming to shift and change in the lamplight. Little Mary was immediately enchanted by the music box, clapping her hands in delight and begging her father to wind it again and again, unaware that each sweet note was drawing her family deeper into a web of supernatural malevolence that would soon consume them all. The music box found its place of honor on the mantelpiece in the family's main parlor, where it could be admired by visitors and enjoyed by the children during their evening recreation time. In those first days following its arrival, the Whitmore household seemed to settle into a new rhythm, centered around the mysterious gift's haunting melodies. Mary, in particular, developed an almost obsessive fascination with the dancing figures, spending hours seated before the fireplace, watching their endless waltz with the rapt attention of a scholar studying ancient texts. Her mother grew concerned when the child began to neglect her other toys and games, speaking only of the dancing children and their beautiful song. But Edmund dismissed these worries as the natural enthusiasm of youth for a new and wondrous plaything. Mrs. Abernathy, however, observed troubling changes that went beyond a child's innocent fascination. In her meticulous journal entries, she documented how the household's atmosphere began to shift in subtle but unmistakable ways. The servants reported strange dreams filled with dancing children who beckoned them to join their eternal celebration. Dreams so vivid that several awakened with the melody still echoing in their minds. The cook complained that food began to spoil more quickly than usual, developing an unpleasant sweetness that reminded her of flowers left too long in a tomb. Even more disturbing, the family's beloved terrier, Buster, refused to enter the parlor where the music box resided, cowering in the doorway with his fur standing on end as if confronting some invisible predator. By the third week of August, the changes in little Mary became impossible to ignore. The vibrant, chattering child who had once filled the house with laughter grew increasingly quiet and withdrawn, speaking only when spoken to and spending most of her waking hours in the parlor, staring at the music box with an intensity that unsettled even her doting father. She began to refuse her favorite foods, claiming they tasted too heavy, and requesting only milk and bread, which she consumed in increasingly smaller quantities. Her complexion, once rosy with health, took on a translucent quality that made the veins beneath her skin visible like delicate blue tracery, and dark circles appeared beneath her eyes, despite her apparent dedication to long hours of sleep. Margaret grew frantic with worry, summoning the family physician, Dr. Cornelius Harding, who had attended the Whitmores for over a decade. Dr. Harding's examination revealed nothing physically wrong with the child. Her heart beat steadily, her lungs were clear, and she showed no signs of the childhood diseases that periodically swept through Hartford's residential neighborhoods. Yet he privately confided to Edmund that the girl's pulse seemed unusually slow, almost languid, and her responses to his questions were delivered in a dreamy, distant manner that suggested her thoughts were elsewhere entirely. He prescribed a tonic to stimulate her appetite and recommended more outdoor activities. But even as he offered these conventional remedies, Dr. Harding found himself troubled by an inexplicable sense of foreboding that he could neither explain nor dismiss. The most disturbing development occurred on the evening of August 23rd. When Thomas discovered his little sister standing in the parlor at 3 o'clock in the morning, still dressed in her nightgown, slowly winding the music box while humming along with its ethereal melody. When he called her name, Mary turned to face him with eyes that seemed to reflect the moonlight streaming through the parlor windows. And for a moment, Thomas later swore, her face appeared to blur and shift, resembling one of the carved dancers rather than his beloved sister. She spoke to him in a voice that seemed to come from a great distance, telling him that the dancing children had invited her to join their celebration and that soon she would never have to be lonely again. The music box's melody continued to play long after she had stopped winding it, filling the house with its haunting refrain until dawn finally broke over Hartford's sleeping streets. As August drew toward its close, the malevolent influence of the music box began to extend beyond little Mary, creeping through the Whitmore household like a slow-moving plague that infected everything it touched. Catherine, the eldest daughter, found herself drawn to the parlor despite her initial indifference to the mysterious gift, often discovering that she had been standing before the mantelpiece for long periods without any memory of how she had arrived there. Her diary, discovered years later during the investigation, revealed increasingly erratic entries describing dreams of dancing in endless circles while a crowd of children watched from the shadows. Their faces obscured, but their eyes gleaming with an otherworldly hunger that filled her with both terror and inexplicable longing. Thomas, normally robust and athletic from his involvement in Hartford's emerging bicycle racing circuit, began to complain of constant fatigue that left him unable to concentrate on his studies or participate in the physical activities he had once enjoyed. His teachers at Hartford Public High School noted a marked decline in his academic performance, reporting that the boy seemed to exist in a perpetual state of distraction, often staring out classroom windows as if listening to music that only he could hear. At home, Mrs. Abernathy observed him unconsciously humming the music box's melody while performing simple tasks, though when questioned, he claimed to have no awareness of the haunting tune that had apparently taken residence in his mind. Even Edmund and Margaret were not immune to the music box's insidious influence, though their adult skepticism initially shielded them from its most direct effects. Edmund found his concentration at the insurance office wavering, particularly during the late afternoon hours when the sun slanted through his office windows at the same angle as the light that illuminated the music box each evening. He began making small errors in his calculations and policy assessments, mistakes that his colleagues attributed to the stress of watching his youngest daughter's mysterious decline. Margaret's charitable work suffered as she became increasingly reluctant to leave the house, claiming that she needed to watch over Mary, but privately confessing to Mrs. Abernathy that she felt drawn to the parlor by a compulsion she could neither understand nor resist. The household staff began to desert their positions with increasing frequency, offering various excuses for their sudden departures, but privately confiding to friends and family that the Whitmore house had become a place of unnatural quiet and creeping dread. The scullery maid, a young Irish immigrant named Bridget O'Malley, fled in the middle of the night after claiming she had seen the carved dancers on the music box moving independently of the mechanism, their tiny faces turning to follow her as she went about her duties. The gardener, a practical German immigrant who had tended the family's grounds for 5 years, abruptly terminated his employment after discovering that the roses in Margaret's prized garden had begun to bloom out of season, their petals bearing an unsettling resemblance to the pale, translucent quality that had overtaken little Mary's complexion. Dr. Harding's subsequent visits to the Whitmore household revealed a family in the grip of some inexplicable malady that defied medical explanation or treatment. Mary's condition continued to deteriorate, her weight dropping to alarming levels, despite the family's desperate attempts to encourage her to eat. More disturbing still were the changes in her behavior. She had begun to speak in whispers about her new friends who visited her in dreams, describing elaborate celebrations and dances that took place in locations she could not name but described with vivid detail. The physician's notes from this period, preserved in Hartford Hospital's historical archives, record his growing conviction that the family was suffering from some form of collective hysteria. Yet his private correspondence reveals his own mounting unease and his inability to explain the physical symptoms that accompanied their psychological decline. By early September, the deteriorating condition of the Whitmore family had begun to attract attention beyond their immediate social circle. Dr. Harding, deeply troubled by his inability to diagnose or treat what appeared to be a contagious form of malaise, consulted with colleagues at Hartford Hospital and eventually reached out to Dr. Eleanor Blackwood, a pioneering physician who had gained recognition for her work with cases of unexplained psychological disturbance. Dr. Blackwood, one of the few female physicians practicing in Connecticut at the turn of the century, brought a unique perspective to her examination of the Whitmore household. Combining medical training with an interest in emerging theories, about the unconscious mind and the power of suggestion. Dr. Blackwood's initial visit to the Woodland Street residence occurred on September 7th, 1901, and her detailed case notes provide the most comprehensive contemporary account of the family's condition during this critical period. She found Edmund Whitmore to be a man visibly aged beyond his years, his formerly robust appearance now marked by the hollow-eyed exhaustion of someone who had not slept properly in weeks. Margaret appeared to exist in a state of nervous agitation, constantly wringing her hands and speaking in fragmented sentences about her fears for her children's welfare. The older children, Catherine and Thomas, moved through the house like sleepwalkers, responding to questions with delayed reactions and vacant stares that suggested their thoughts were focused on matters far removed from their immediate surroundings. Most disturbing of all was little Mary, who had become so frail that she appeared almost ethereal, her once bright eyes now reflecting a dreamy contentment that seemed entirely disconnected from her physical decline. Dr. Blackwood's examination revealed that the child's heartbeat had slowed to a barely perceptible rhythm. Her breathing had become so shallow as to be nearly undetectable, and her skin had taken on a translucent quality that made her appear more like a porcelain doll than a living child. When questioned about her well-being, Mary spoke in a sing-song voice about the wonderful dances she attended each night, describing elaborate ballrooms filled with children who welcomed her with open arms and promised her eternal happiness if she would only join them permanently. The surviving member of the household staff, Mrs. Abernathy, proved to be Dr. Blackwood's most valuable source of information about the progression of the family's strange malady. The housekeeper's journals, meticulously maintained throughout the crisis, documented the gradual changes that had overtaken the household since the arrival of the mysterious music box. Mrs. Abernathy described how the very atmosphere of the house had changed, becoming heavy and oppressive, filled with the constant sound of that haunting melody, even when the music box remained unwound. She reported that the family's meals grew cold before they could be consumed, that flowers wilted within hours of being brought into the house, and that mirrors throughout the residence had begun to develop a strange cloudiness that made reflections appear distorted and unfamiliar. Dr. Blackwood's scientific training compelled her to seek rational explanations for the phenomena she observed, leading her to investigate potential sources of environmental contamination that might explain the family's collective symptoms. She arranged for samples of the household's water supply to be analyzed, examined the paint and wallpaper for traces of arsenic or other toxic substances, and even consulted with experts about the possibility of gas leaks or other invisible hazards. However, all of these investigations yielded negative results, forcing her to confront the possibility that the family's condition might stem from psychological rather than physical causes. Her attention inevitably turned to the ornate music box that occupied the place of honor in the parlor, the one constant factor that coincided with the onset of the household's mysterious decline. Dr. Blackwood's examination of the music box revealed craftsmanship of extraordinary sophistication, with mechanisms more complex than those typically found in such decorative items. The ebony wood from which it was constructed appeared to be of European origin, possibly German or Austrian, while the mother-of-pearl inlays showed signs of age that suggested the piece was considerably older than its recent arrival might indicate. Most intriguingly, hidden beneath the velvet lining of the interior compartment, she discovered a small brass plate bearing an inscription in what appeared to be Latin, though the words were arranged in a pattern that suggested they might be part of a larger text or incantation, rather than a simple identification of the craftsman or workshop. The melody produced by the music box proved equally mysterious when Dr. Blackwood attempted to trace its origins through consultation with Hartford's musical community. The city's orchestra conductor, Professor Heinrich Zimmermann, listened to the haunting tune with growing unease, claiming that while he could not identify the specific composition, certain elements reminded him of traditional European folk songs associated with harvest festivals and seasonal celebrations. However, he noted that the melody had been altered in subtle ways that created an unsettling effect, with intervals and progressions that seemed designed to induce a hypnotic state in listeners rather than provide conventional musical entertainment. Further investigation into the music box's provenance led Dr. Blackwood to Hartford's small but well-established antique dealing community, where she hoped to trace the item's history through shipping records or import documentation. Her inquiries eventually led her to Cornelius Ashworth, an elderly dealer who specialized in European curiosities and maintained extensive records of his transactions. Ashworth's ledgers revealed no record of the specific music box, but his examination of the piece triggered disturbing memories of a similar item he had briefly acquired several years earlier from the estate of a deceased collector in Boston. That music box, according to Ashworth's recollections, had been returned to him by the purchaser's family after a series of unexplained deaths occurred in their household, and he had subsequently destroyed the item rather than risk selling it to another unsuspecting customer. The investigation took a more ominous turn when Dr. Blackwood discovered that Hartford's municipal records contained references to similar incidents dating back several decades. A systematic search through newspaper archives and public documents revealed a pattern of mysterious deaths and disappearances that seemed to coincide with the presence of ornate music boxes in various households throughout New England. The most detailed account concerned the Pemberton family of Salem, Massachusetts, who had reportedly suffered the loss of 3 children under mysterious circumstances in 1887, with surviving family members claiming that the children had been called away by supernatural forces associated with a music box that had arrived without explanation at their home. Dr. Blackwood's research eventually uncovered a connection between these incidents and a workshop that had operated in the Black Forest region of Germany during the mid-19th century. The workshop, according to fragmented historical records, had been run by a craftsman named Klaus Zimmern, who had gained notoriety for creating musical instruments and toys that were said to possess unusual properties. Local folklore claimed that Zimmern had made a pact with dark forces to imbue his creations with the power to bridge the gap between the world of the living and the realm of the dead, allowing him to craft items that could call children's souls away from their earthly existence to join eternal celebrations in otherworldly ballrooms. The workshop had been destroyed by fire in 1863, following a series of child disappearances in nearby villages. But rumors persisted that Zimmern's creations continued to circulate throughout Europe and eventually made their way to collectors in America. As September progressed, little Mary's condition reached a critical juncture that left even Dr. Blackwood questioning whether medical intervention could save the child from whatever force had taken hold of her. The girl had become so physically frail that she appeared to be fading away before her family's eyes, her weight dropping to dangerous levels, while her ethereal contentment grew more pronounced with each passing day. She spoke constantly of the approaching celebration to which she had been invited, describing elaborate preparations being made by her new friends for a dance that would last throughout eternity. Her descriptions of these supernatural companions grew increasingly detailed, including names, personalities, and histories that seemed far too complex and consistent to be the product of a child's imagination. Mary Whitmore, driven to desperation by her daughter's decline, made the difficult decision to remove the music box from the house, despite Mary's piteous pleas and increasingly violent protests. On the evening of September 18th, Edmund and Thomas carried the ornate wooden box to the carriage house, where they locked it away in a storage room, hoping that separation from the mysterious object might break whatever hold it had established over their family. The immediate result was catastrophic. Mary collapsed into a state of near catatonia, lying motionless in her bed while tears streamed continuously down her pale cheeks. She spoke only to beg for the return of her dancing friends, claiming that they were calling to her from across a great distance and that she could not bear to be separated from them any longer. The rest of the family experienced their own forms of distress following the music box's removal. Catherine found herself unable to sleep, pacing her room throughout the night while humming the melody that continued to echo in her mind despite the absence of its source. Thomas complained of vivid nightmares in which children dressed in old-fashioned clothing beckoned to him from the shadows, their faces bearing expressions of terrible longing and accusation. Even Edmund and Margaret found themselves drawn to the carriage house, standing before the locked door while fighting the overwhelming urge to retrieve the music box and restore it to its place of honor in the parlor. Mrs. Abernathy noted in her journal that the very air in the house seemed to vibrate with tension, as if the building itself was straining against some invisible force that threatened to tear it apart. Dr. Blackwood, summoned urgently to the household, arrived to find the family in a state of crisis that transcended anything she had previously witnessed in her medical practice. Mary's vital signs had become so weak as to be barely detectable, yet she remained conscious and aware, speaking in whispers about the music that continued to play in her mind and the dancers who waited patiently for her to join their eternal celebration. The physician realized that conventional medical treatment would be ineffective against whatever supernatural force had claimed the child, leading her to make a desperate decision that would haunt her for the remainder of her career. Against all her scientific training and professional instincts, she recommended that the music box be returned to Mary, believing that a gradual separation might be possible where sudden removal had proven catastrophic. The reunion between Mary and the music box occurred on the evening of September 21st, as the autumn equinox approached and the days grew shorter in Hartford. The moment the ornate wooden box was returned to the parlor mantelpiece, Mary's condition seemed to stabilize, though her ethereal contentment returned with an intensity that left no doubt about the supernatural bond that connected her to the mysterious object. She spent her final days seated before the fireplace, watching the carved dancers perform their endless waltz while she hummed along with the haunting melody. Dr. Blackwood remained in constant attendance, documenting every detail of what she had come to understand was not an illness, but a supernatural transformation that was drawing the child inexorably towards some other worldly realm where music and dance continued throughout eternity. On the night of September 24th, 1901, as Hartford slept beneath a canopy of stars that seemed unusually bright and distant, little Mary Whitmore prepared for what she had come to understand was her final earthly evening. The music box had been playing continuously for 3 days, its mechanism somehow sustaining the haunting melody without need for winding, while the carved dancers performed their eternal waltz with movements that seemed to grow more fluid and lifelike with each passing hour. Mrs. Abernathy, maintaining her vigil in the parlor despite her own exhaustion and fear, later described how the very air around the music box began to shimmer like heat waves rising from summer pavement, creating distortions that made the carved figures appear to step beyond the confines of their wooden prison. Mary, now so translucent that she seemed more spirit than flesh, spoke throughout the evening in a voice that grew progressively fainter, describing the magnificent ballroom that awaited her and the countless children who had gathered to welcome her to their eternal celebration. She spoke of friends from different eras and distant places, all united by their connection to similar music boxes and their shared fate of being called away from earthly existence to join the supernatural dance. Her descriptions were so vivid and detailed that Mrs. Abernathy found herself almost able to visualize the otherworldly realm that beckoned to the dying child, a place where music never ceased and joy never faded, but where the price of admission was the surrender of all connection to the mortal world. The rest of the Whitmore family gathered in the parlor as midnight approached, drawn by an instinctive understanding that they were witnessing the culmination of events that had been set in motion with the music box's arrival 6 weeks earlier. Edmund held his wife close as she wept silently, both parents recognizing that their youngest daughter was departing on a journey from which she would never return. Catherine and Thomas sat on either side of Mary's chair, holding her increasingly cold hands while listening to her whispered descriptions of the wonders that awaited her in the realm of eternal dance. Dr. Blackwood remained present as both physician and witness, her scientific mind struggling to document phenomena that challenged every principle of rational thought. As the church bells of Hartford chimed midnight, Mary's breathing became so shallow as to be imperceptible, yet she continued to speak in a voice that seemed to come from an ever greater distance. She described stepping through a doorway made of moonlight and music, entering a vast ballroom where hundreds of children danced in perfect harmony to melodies that touched the very essence of joy and sorrow simultaneously. Her final words, barely audible even to those gathered closest around her chair, were expressions of gratitude to her family for allowing her to answer the call of the dancing children, and promises that she would be happy in ways that earthly existence could never provide. The music box's melody reached a crescendo that filled every corner of the house with its haunting beauty, then gradually faded to silence as little Mary Whitmore drew her last breath and departed for realms beyond mortal understanding. The aftermath of Mary's death left the Whitmore household shattered in ways that extended far beyond conventional grief. Her body, discovered the following morning still seated in the parlor chair, appeared to have simply faded away during the night, leaving behind only the faintest impression of the vibrant child she had once been. The music box, silent now for the first time since its arrival, showed signs of some fundamental change. The carved dancers had somehow shifted position during the night, and careful examination revealed that their number had increased by one, with a new figure bearing an unmistakable resemblance to little Mary, now joining the eternal waltz around the central maypole. Dr. Blackwood's attempt to wind the mechanism produced no sound, as if the music box had completed its purpose and would remain forever silent, its supernatural mission accomplished. In the months following Mary's death, the remaining members of the Whitmore family struggled to rebuild their lives while carrying the weight of knowledge that few would believe and fewer still would understand. Edmund sold the family's insurance business and moved his shattered household to a smaller residence in West Hartford, hoping that distance from Woodland Street might help them escape the memories that haunted their every waking moment. The music box was donated to Hartford's Historical Society with strict instructions that it never be displayed publicly or handled by visitors, joining a collection of artifacts deemed too dangerous or disturbing for general exhibition. Margaret never fully recovered from the loss of her youngest daughter, spending her remaining years in a state of melancholy that no amount of medical treatment or family support could alleviate. Catherine and Thomas carried the psychological scars of their supernatural encounter into adulthood, both struggling with recurring dreams and an inexplicable fear of music that limited their ability to participate fully in the social activities expected of young people in their economic class. Catherine never married, devoting herself instead to charitable work that kept her occupied during daylight hours while she fought against the haunting melodies that continued to echo in her mind during the quiet moments before sleep. Thomas eventually established a successful career in banking, but his colleagues noted his peculiar aversion to social gatherings where musical entertainment might be provided, and his nervous habit of humming unconsciously when under stress. Always the same haunting melody that had once emanated from an ornate music box in his family's parlor. Dr. Eleanor Blackwood's investigation into the Mary Whitmore case became the foundation for her groundbreaking work in the emerging field of paranormal psychology. Though she was careful to present her findings in terms that would not compromise her professional reputation among Hartford's medical community, her detailed case notes, sealed in the archives of Hartford Hospital, provided future researchers with invaluable documentation of supernatural phenomena that defied conventional scientific explanation. She continued to investigate similar cases throughout her career, developing theories about the intersection between psychological suggestion and genuine otherworldly influence, but never again encountered anything quite as profound or disturbing as the events that had unfolded in the Whitmore household during those terrible weeks in August and September of 1901. Mrs. Abernathy's journals, discovered after her death in 1923, provided historians with the most complete contemporary account of the supernatural events that had claimed little Mary Whitmore's life. Her meticulous documentation of the family's decline, written in the precise handwriting of a woman trained in domestic service, captured details that escaped the attention of the physicians and investigators who studied the case. Her final entry, dated September 25, 1901, described her last glimpse of the music box before its donation to the Historical Society. The dancing children appear content now, their eternal waltz complete with the addition of Sweet Mary to their number. I pray that she has found the joy she sought in their otherworldly ballroom, though I fear for any who might encounter similar temptations in years to come. Some doors, once opened, can never again be fully closed. The music box itself remained in the Hartford Historical Society's restricted collection for nearly 2 decades, carefully catalogued and stored away from public access. However, in 1919, during a reorganization of the Society's archives, the ornate wooden box mysteriously disappeared from its secure storage location, leaving behind only a faint outline in the dust and a lingering trace of the haunting melody that several staff members reported hearing in the days following the discovery of its absence. No records exist of the music box's removal, and extensive searches of the building and its grounds yielded no clues to explain how such a carefully monitored artifact could simply vanish without trace. Some historians suggest that the box was stolen by a collector with knowledge of its supernatural properties, while others maintain that it departed of its own volition, called to continue its dark mission in some distant household where unsuspecting children might once again hear the call of eternal dance. The truth, like so many aspects of the Mary Whitmore case, remains shrouded in mystery, leaving future generations to wonder whether the dancing children continue their otherworldly celebration somewhere beyond the reach of mortal understanding, forever adding to their number through the power of music and the vulnerable hearts of those who hear their irresistible call.